In my opinion, the worst thing that can happen is they say no or they don't respond. And that's not a very bad thing. That's just one person who's either ignoring you or says, hey, I'm not interested, sorry. But the benefits of it greatly outweigh the risks. You can have a new connection, like how I met you, or I can not have anyone respond to me. As long as I keep it in that mentality, there's not much stress that goes into it.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Saba Kidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research, leaders, and today's young people, as together we explore how might we design schools. It has been a while since I last released an episode, and I have so many exciting updates to share with you. If you follow me on Instagram, you might already know that I resigned from my position as Education Leadership Executive at Apple last month, and I have so many new exciting projects that are waiting to be shared. Conversations like the ones I'm going to share with you today are just one of the many types of things I'm excited to bring you. Over the past decade, I've had the privilege of visiting and working with so many schools around the world and speaking with people about their enthusiasm and their commitment to designing school experiences and cultures that are more relevant for today's learner. I've also had the pleasure of speaking to many students and hearing from them about projects that they've been working on and what changes they hope to see in their experience at school. It's my vision and goal that this podcast bridges the gap between researchers, school leaders, and young people about how might we design school. In January, I'll resume again with a new look and a new title, so this is a glimpse into what's to come. Moving forward, the podcast will be called Designing Schools, where each week you'll have the opportunity to listen in and expand your network as I speak with researchers, leaders, and young people about how they're designing school. If you have a story you'd like to tell or someone you think I need to bring onto the show, you can reach out to me on my website, designingschools.org. You'll find a form on the podcast page where you can submit your story, and I'll reach out to you with next steps. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Seth Raphael. He's a student and a full-stack developer. As a student in virtual school, he realized that getting to classes on time every day is hard when there are so many distractions in both the virtual and physical world. So he created LinkJoin with the goal of helping people to keep meeting links all in one place and have LinkJoin open them for you at just the right time. LinkJoin started as a personal project to Seth to make getting to classes on time easier. But he soon realized that this would be a valuable tool for everyone, especially students and those who struggle with getting distracted. I first met Seth when he messaged me on LinkedIn. Now, for any of us on LinkedIn, you'll immediately resonate with this when I say the spam problem in direct messages is real. Seth's message, however, immediately stood out to me. His professionalism, direct ask, and energy sparked my curiosity. And as I learned more, I was just so impressed that I knew he would be a great guest to share with my audience. During the pandemic, Seth found himself with extra time on his hands and a problem that he was eager to solve for. So I begin by asking Seth, how did you first discover the need for your company, LinkJoin?
I just kept noticing every single day that I would be late to my classes by, say, 5 minutes, just because we had such a weird passing period in between my classes where we had 7 minutes, which is such an odd number. And it's just enough time for me to get distracted from school and get engrossed in doing something else on the computer. It started as just a simple program on my computer that I put in my class links and I put in the times and it just automatically opened them. And it worked great. I wasn't late anymore. I'd wanted to show it to a few of my friends and I sent the program to them, but then they had to set up how to run the program and everything. And it was just really inconvenient. So I had the idea of turning it into a website and then I just went through with it. So I had this website that automatically opened my meetings, organized them, and it evolved from there. And it really helped because I wasn't late to my classes anymore. Super useful. In school, I generally haven't had a lot of freedom in what I do. I just have to take these classes. I have to get through them. And there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to find the problems and solve them for myself. But then I feel like in virtual learning, that changed more. I don't have all of my time in school just occupied with being in the classes and being in the moment and learning. I have more time to just evolve, find the problems, and try and solve them. Also, obviously, there were more problems to solve in virtual learning.
Seth's story is a reminder of just how much potential today's learners have to create, collaborate, and design solutions to things that they are interested in. I particularly love how easily Seth said, I just went through with it. We all have frustrating moments during our day. However, we don't all pause to say, you know what? I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to create a solution. It's one of the many reasons I advocate for the design thinking methodology in schools. Seth clearly has a mindset that leans toward creative confidence. He had an idea and he executed on it. In just a few sentences, Seth embodies so many of the other mindsets that come from engaging in design thinking. He models empathy by recognizing a need and sharing his solution. Yet he also recognizes the inconvenience for the user. He iterates on his initial idea as a result. Above all, you can hear the optimism in his voice. He saw a challenge and he turned it into an opportunity. I'm also reminded, though, that not all students have the access and exposure to navigate the challenges they see in this way. And that's why it's imperative that we design schools with experiences that allow young people to develop the mindset and skill set to thrive in their world. As author William Gibson reminds us, the future is here, it just isn't evenly distributed. I share this with Seth and I ask him, how are you able to develop this mindset and the skills to take action on your idea?
So I'd taken a couple classes before on Python, a programming language, and then also HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are used for more making websites. So at first, I had really just known Python at that point. So I wrote up a little script where I just put in my classes, times, and like the periods, so it would go in order, and they just opened on my computer. So then for the website, I started off with a very bare bones program where it was just doing it and it didn't look like much at all. So it just was like a blank white page with some input boxes, and it opened the meetings, which was the first struggle because I didn't really know how to do that at that point. So I learned a lot from this project as well. I learned the majority of my knowledge of JavaScript, HTML, CSS just from learning as I went and gaining experience. So it was really good for me and for my education.
One of the things that strikes me with each question is how many times Seth says, I just did this. Listening to students share these stories are perhaps the most insightful learning moments for leaders. For the past few years, I've been part of facilitating conversations about designing school with district leadership teams. And over time, I've noticed a discrepancy between what adults feel designing school should look like and what students feel designing school should look like. When we break the barriers and invite educators and students into the conversation together, we're designing with empathy. And as I've learned over the years, when we begin with empathy, what we think is challenged by what we learn. I asked Seth to share, did he hire someone to create the website, or did he do this on his own?
Yeah, I did. I'm really into programming, all these different languages, and it's just something I really enjoy. I started off in these ID tech camps, these in-person camps. Now they're virtual because COVID, but they're the in-person camps that my mom had put me in from just a really young age. And I would go to them, I'd just learn a bit, and then I'd pretty much forget everything that I knew. But then I could go back summer after summer, and it was just really fun, but I never really took to doing it. So then in school, in 7th grade, I just happened to break my finger. So I now had access to a computer in school because I couldn't write very well. So I was bored in school. I had a computer. I was like, hey, why not try and mess around with some of this programming knowledge that I used to have? I tried to use it and it was fun. I made little programs, and I was like, wow, this is pretty neat. So I asked my parents to enroll me in another Python course that was more in depth and taught me a lot more Python. It gave me a really solid foundation. So I had taken this class and then I had this Python knowledge. So now that led me to there. I had the knowledge to make a program to solve my problem. So I did.
Seth's story highlights the many challenges that are echoed by the quintessential question being asked around the world by everyone. How do we move away from this industrial model of education that values conformity over creativity and rote memorization over critical thinking, creating this divide between learning as a lifelong pursuit and schooling? You can hear Seth's enthusiasm for learning, yet the design of his experiences, while each incredibly beneficial, were disconnected, and it shouldn't have taken a broken finger for him to be able to connect the dots. This reminds me of how Alfie Kahn highlights that school often has different meanings for children from different backgrounds. Where schools for the well-off are about inquiry and choice, schools for the poor are often about drills and compliance. A challenge that perpetuates the pedagogy of poverty integration of technology in schools. This also reminds me of something that Paul Atwell talks about. He proposes that placing devices in the hands of every student is not a solution. And with the pandemic, we've seen now many schools integrate one-to-one experiences for learners. However, Atwell reminds us it's not enough to just place a device into the hands of students. He says we have to address the digital use divide, where he says we have to change the tasks that students are doing when provided with devices. Seth's experience of learning takes place in isolation, a challenge that educators are all too familiar with, as they too are often asked to design these experiences in isolation. This is another area where design thinking plays an instrumental role. It brings people together to lead with empathy and their strengths to co-design experiences. It's not how might I design these experiences, it's how might we. When we make this shift from designing for to designing with, we begin to work collaboratively with our colleagues and our learners. When we realize we're all great at something, but we can't be great at everything. And that is probably one of the most liberating ideas that one can hold in this changing world of work. If there was one lesson I had to choose from the research that I did at Design 39, it was this takeaway, because it was mentioned by almost every single person being interviewed. Everyone had shared that prior to this collaborative experience of co-designing learning, they had felt as if they were on their own island. It didn't matter how much support from leadership they had, they said. What mattered was being able to have people to co-design with. After hearing Seth share how he was able to execute on his idea, I'm curious to hear more about why he felt bored in school and what changes he'd like to see as a learner.
This was 7th grade. It was right before the pandemic had happened. And I was learning stuff on my own as well as in school. I would just finish class material because I read at a very fast pace. So like in social studies, I would finish reading our excerpt in the textbook and then we would do a little writing about it. And I do that on the computer. So then I could just switch over to a tab and then mess around a bit on the computer and just do a bit of coding. I think that lessons should be more engaging rather than just talking. I think partner activities are really good where you can work on something with a friend and it gives you that social interaction as well. Whereas instead of just listening to a lecture, reading a bit, and then just answering questions, that makes it a lot more interesting. Plus, you then finish at the same time and you have someone to talk to when you're done.
Over the past year and a half in particular, I've heard countless people tell me they want to make learning more engaging. Too often, I find we turn to apps. However, as Seth highlights, a core part of engaging learning isn't about technology at all. It's about relationships. As schools, a critical question we have to ask is how might we leverage technology to deepen relationships? A few months ago, Devin Vidichka, Kristen Gagnere, and I wrote an article. I'll link it in the show notes. It was called Prioritize Building Relationships with Your Students. What the Science Says, where we take a step back to ask, what is most important to students? So what did the students say? Well, when we listen to our students, they tell us that they want to be engaged in learning. They want to be connected to school. They want to be motivated to learn and persist amidst challenges. They want to feel connected to their teachers, their peers, and to their learning environment. One of the reasons co-designing learning as educators is beneficial is that it allows us to create more comprehensive experiences. Instead of seeing academics, technology, social emotional learning, and the list goes on as mutually exclusive, we lead with our strengths and design experiences at the intersection of everything we value. Speaking of balancing multiple priorities, I asked Seth to tell us what it's like balancing entrepreneurship while starting out as a freshman in high school.
It was a lot easier during virtual school because I would have all this free time in virtual school where I was just already at the computer all the time, and I could just wrap up an assignment or just during the breaks work on LinkJoin and all my different projects. So it was a lot less challenging to manage it then, and I'm having to work on doing that now. I assume going to get a bit more difficult after I get more homework as we progress into the year, but I just have to work on managing the time, balancing out outreach about LinkJoin, and then actually working on it, and then my school stuff.
Are you working on it with anyone, or is it just you right now?
It's really just me working on it. I had a friend that I met online on a social media platform called Discord, where I had posted a little teaser about a website I was making, LinkJoin. And he was like, hey, do you want me to make a user interface for you? And I was like, no, that's okay. But then he sent me some designs that he had already made for it, which just looked amazing. So I was like, oh my God, yeah, thank you so much. This looks so cool. Do you mind if I use this? He's like, yeah, that's why I made it. So I used these mock-ups, which are not code. They're just digital representations of what it could look like. And I transferred them into the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the design has evolved since then, but it's kept a lot of that original look from when he made it. I've collaborated with him on that, and I'm really grateful for that.
I've mentioned a few times now the value of leading with strengths. It's a critical part of becoming more self-aware. Yet, how do you begin? One of my favorite tools for doing this is using something called Thrively. I'll link it for you in the show notes and highly recommend you following Joe Arpelding. I'll link his info for you as well. Each day, Joe shares how he's bringing this experience of discovering and learning with strengths for both adults and children to schools. Thrively's unique assessment allows educators and students to learn, articulate, and design experiences in alignment with their strengths. This is so important as today's world is about having a deep level of self-awareness where you know what strengths you bring to the table and which ones you don't, helping you become a stronger collaborator. This is something that Seth highlights as well. So I asked him about the role social media plays in his life and how this has allowed him to connect with other people to advance his work as an entrepreneur.
So it's a great tool that can be used for outreach, getting to know people, and all that stuff. Like, I would not be able to do anything that I've done without the use of the internet and social media. And I think a lot of people definitely utilize social media for a lot of things. And I think it's more professional social medias like LinkedIn that are used for reaching out to people usually and getting collaboration and stuff like that. This was a bit of a unique case.
Definitely. No, that's fantastic. Okay. So you mentioned LinkedIn. I want to go back to that story of how we first came to know each other. I was just so incredibly impressed by your outreach email. I feel like we get tons of outreach emails like that in my inbox. And I have to say, I don't really pay attention to half of them, but yours literally made me pause. It was so well written. It was so professional. I am so curious to know how you learned to do that. Not just in terms of like, this is how you write a great email, but even just your confidence in doing so at your age and why you chose LinkedIn as the platform.
So starting with how I chose LinkedIn, it was just a thing that I'd heard about, but I didn't know much about it originally. I just heard it was the place to be for product development, reaching out to find people. I had tried to sign up for a LinkedIn account, and I had gotten myself set up with someone to talk on the phone with about joining LinkedIn because I was so young. Usually for students joining LinkedIn, you have to be 16 or up. So what I ended up doing after getting the advice and encouragement from this person on the phone, I signed up for an account not under the guise of being a student, but being a professional. So I didn't have to lie about my age or anything. I just signed up as a professional and it let me continue. Then I'd just been doing outreach on LinkedIn from there, finding people with the assistance of my mom who had more experience with LinkedIn, although still not much. And we would just find good people to talk to and reach out to. And that's how I've gotten contacts on it. I think I have over 350 connections now.
If there's one takeaway I hope you leave this episode with, it's the power of believing in your idea and the persistence to solve despite what obstacles come your way. Seth demonstrates this time and time again with his story of how he built LinkJoin. I also want to take a moment to call out Seth's integrity. Too often, students are not trusted to engage in these types of projects because of all the things that we as adults think they might do wrong. And so we so often rarely pause to discuss what are all the things that could go right if we were to trust students and educators to give them the opportunity, the time, the mentorship that it really takes to design these learning experiences. I asked Seth to highlight for us the benefits that he sees for young people when they're allowed these experiences and when they're allowed to engage in the tools like social media as he has with LinkedIn.
A lot of the benefits come from just being able to browse people. You can search in a category like EdTech, and I can just see a ton of experts in the field that would be great to reach out to. It's so different from just searching online, trying to find the right people, not knowing qualifications or anything. And of course, a lot of Google searches about people go to LinkedIn. It's just a really good place to find people and connect with them and also get to know them and see what's going on with them.
Earlier in this episode, I highlighted the importance of building relationships. As a student who graduated in 2007 during the Great Recession and again in 2020 during the world pandemic, nothing has been more transformative for me as a student and an individual navigating today's world of work than the relationships that I've built both in person and online. Building social capital is one of the greatest ways in which we can bridge the equity divide that challenges students all over the world. And it's something that I'm really excited to be doing at Wix. I'll be talking a lot more about my new job and role at Wix, but one of the reasons I'm so excited is to be able to bring this conversation to the forefront. Wix is actually the platform that I use to develop my first website. Being able to build this social capital and develop the skills and mindset that it takes to showcase and share your work online is one of the most powerful things that we can give today's learners. So I asked Seth what advice he would give to young people who are not even sure that they have anything valuable to share. And I asked him where his confidence to share comes from.
In my opinion, the worst thing that can happen is they say no or they don't respond. And that's not a very bad thing. That's just one person who's either ignoring you or says, hey, I'm not interested, sorry. But the benefits of it greatly outweigh the risks. You can have a new connection, like how I met you, or I can just not have anyone respond to me. As long as I keep it in that mentality, there's not much stress that goes into it.
Seth exemplifies all the benefits that come to navigating today's world when you have a design thinking mindset. We often talk about the importance of learning from failure, yet one of the most challenging mindsets to overcome that Seth masterfully does is this transition from focusing on what could go wrong to focusing on what could go right. I asked Seth what skills he believes are important for his generation to develop.
I think a skill that is really important is just time management. When you're juggling all these different things like school, professional life, different jobs, it's really difficult to get to a nice balance of the workloads and make them work with each other and for each other. It's really hard to find that right balance, but that's a skill that's really important, one that I have not quite mastered yet. And that's something that school really does help with. Having to juggle all these assignments, it may feel painful, but in the long run, it's really beneficial to learn how to do it in a low stakes environment like education.
If you Google skills of the future or a list of most profiles of a graduate, I don't know that time management is something that often comes up. It's again one of the critical reasons why we need to bridge the divide that exists in designing schools and have more conversations with the people we're designing for, students. While we all agree creativity, critical thinking, coding, entrepreneurship, communication, and so on are essential, the foundation for successfully executing on these is indeed time management. As we design experiences that give learners more autonomy, we increase their ability to master this skill. Seth shared with us the skills he feels are important for people his age. Throughout this conversation, he's made me think of Gary Vee and the advice that he often gives. I now ask him what mindsets he feels are important to develop and who are the people that he enjoys learning from.
A way of thinking that's important for people my age, I guess just going for it. There's not much holding you back when you're just in high school, a time in your life when there's not much lifelong pressure that's going to impact you. Like if you are an adult and you have a job, you need to manage that because you need to have an income. But if you're a student, your parents are hopefully supporting you and you don't need to be earning money. So there's lots of different things that you can just go for and try. And there's no real harm that can come from doing them. The worst thing that can happen is rejection, and you can just try again. People that inspire me, I guess just anyone that's started a company or a startup or something that solves a problem just from nothing. Like where you come from somewhere and you just see a problem and you create a solution and then it just becomes popular and then it becomes the norm. That's something that I aspire to do with LinkJoin, where I just solve a problem that students and a lot of face, just not being able to keep track of things, not being on time, and it can just become the norm, the gold standard for online meetings.
So you heard it here from Seth. Go for it. What have you been thinking about creating lately? What frustrations could you turn into an opportunity? I want to take a moment here also and acknowledge that not everyone has parents that are able to provide the types of extracurricular opportunities that Seth's parents were able to provide to him. It's one of the reasons it's imperative that we leverage this moment where many of us have gone one-to-one with devices and we have poured so much technology into our schools to truly design experiences around inquiry, around choice, around the relevant mindset and skill set that students need to thrive in their world. I often refer back to the quote shared by William Gibson, where he says the future is here. It just isn't evenly distributed. And as schools, it's our responsibility to ask, how might we even out that distribution, providing all students with the mindset and skill set to thrive, not just in their workplaces and careers, but as global citizens in today's world. If you have questions or you'd like to learn more about how you can begin designing these experiences, reach out to me at designingschools.org. So what's next for Seth? I ask him how he continues to overcome the fear of failure and what he's excited for moving forward.
So telling myself before I send that email or just doing something, I always have those doubts of like, what if I misworded something and they misinterpret it or they don't understand what I'm saying? And so I just convinced myself, okay, look at this. This is the best thing that you can think of right now that you can do. And that satisfies me. If this is the best that I can do, then that's the best I can do. That's the best that someone can expect from me. And that's all that I can do.
I think that's so beautiful. Not only is that incredibly self-aware, I think that's also giving yourself like so much grace as well to be able to take that step. That's very, very well articulated advice that I have to say I haven't heard anyone else share yet on the podcast. So I am really curious, with LinkJoin going on, you just started high school. What are some of your future plans, or what problems are you excited to solve? What things are you excited for in the future?
So I really don't know what the future is going to hold for me. I hope that it has something to do with LinkJoin in the future and with coding, computer science, things like that. But if it doesn't, then I'm sure I'll be set on a good path. Whatever path I decide to take, I'm really hopeful and confident that it'll be one that I am happy with. And if it's not, I can always divert. I can try again.
Share a little bit about LinkJoin and how people can best support you.
The best way to support right now is just to sign up, to use it, to show it to people. I just want people to be using it, for it to grow and have a big audience and a big user base, and for it to be helping as many people as possible. And then eventually for it to grow, maybe be distributed to schools. That would be the greatest thing.
Awesome. Well, I am very, very excited to get this episode out there, to be able to share and to support your work and spread not just what you're creating, but the process and your journey in creating it as well, in the problem you've identified and the steps you've taken to solve for it too.
Well, thank you so much for this. This has been awesome.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. If you have a moment, we'd love if you could leave a review, as it helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities that others might not even know exist. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community.